Hey everybody, thanks for watching. This is the second video I'm doing. I want to thank everybody who actually took the time to watch the long first video, and I hope now that you realize the truth about religion in the Bible and that your third eye is now open. And the third eye isn't evil. When you see people, cover the one eye, it just means that they know, that they understand what's going on. They got the information. They know their third eye is open. But your third eye really is your pineal and pituitary gland. It's that pineal gland that for black people, when the sun hits it, we are children of the sun. So when sun hits that pineal gland, when it hits our head, it gives us more knowledge. The melanin in us activates because of the sun. We're children of the sun. It's what white people don't have, and one of the reasons why they hate us so much. But that's a whole nother discussion. Now, in this video, I want to talk about money. I want to talk about the money system in America and how everybody there is getting scammed out of every dollar that they've ever made. I also want to talk about how this affects the black community, and I really want to talk about the real reason why slaves were set free. One more thing I want to get into is, what does it mean to be a U.S. citizen, especially if you're a black person? Definitely want to get into that as well. Now, what is money? Now, money is basically worthless, really. The paper money that we have in America is worthless. But if you can get people to accept pieces of paper for money, then money is worth whatever we all agree that it is worth. Now, we all know that money used to be in coin form a long time ago. Now, a lot of people don't know how that came to be and what was the whole process with that. Now, before, we had gold banks because everything was done in coins, gold and silver. Now, if you was rich and you had a whole lot of gold, it was very dangerous way back then to keep so much gold or silver in your property because you can get robbed, and that's what happened to a lot of people. So gold banks came about, and what they did was they stored the rich people's and basically anybody's gold and silver, for a price. So they kept that gold and silver safe. And what the goldsmith used to do is, when a person came to deposit gold, he would give them like a receipt for different denominations of gold, or for the entire amount of gold that they had in his safes. Now, what people used to do is they used to take those receipts that they got for their gold that they deposit and go into town and buy things with the receipts, pay for goods and services with the receipts for gold. And those people would do the same thing, because it was just easier for you to carry around a paper receipt that was just as good as gold than carry around heavy actual gold and silver in your pockets. So this is basically how paper money came to be. People would basically transfer the receipts as gold, but at any time they can go into a goldsmith or gold bank and deposit the slip and get their gold out. Now, what happened was the goldsmith realized that people were actually dishonest and they wasn't coming in to pick up their gold. Now, at one time was everybody who had gold in his bank coming to pick up their gold. So he had a lot of gold on hand. Now, what the goldsmith did was he decided to loan other people's gold out at interest. And instead of giving them actual gold, what he would do was give them the paper receipts for gold. So that way he would have that actual gold on hand and not have to actually give out any gold. And because the people was using the paper receipts for money, that receipt was just as good as money. So the money and profit he made off of that, he used that money to buy more gold and repeat the process. Now, the goldsmith only needed to have a fraction of the gold on hand that he loaned out. So he would still have the people gold that stored their gold in his gold bank, but when he bought more gold, he only really needed to buy a fraction of the gold that he loaned out, because people wasn't coming in to claim the gold at one time. Only once in a while somebody came in. Now, this process is called fractional reserve banking, and it's still in place today in America. Our banks still use the process of fractional reserve banking. And when you think about it, it's fraud, because they're basically taking your savings and loaning it to other people and making a profit off of it, and they're charging you for keeping your money in their bank. Now, when they make a loan to a person and that person pays interest, that's a profit for them, and they can take that interest money and make more money off of it. The process just repeats itself. Now, how is this possible? Now, to figure out how this really worked, we got to go back to Benjamin Franklin. Now we all know that the Colonials and Benjamin Franklin was under the rule of King George III. They still had to do what the king told them to do. Now King George and most of the people over in Europe was using a fractional reserve banking system, and their money was actually backed by gold and silver. But the colonists was using colonial script. It wasn't backed by anything. It was just paper money. But it worked. It worked in America. Everybody flourished. Everybody did well with just this paper system. Now, in 1757, King George sent for Benjamin Franklin and asked him what were they using for money. And this is what he said.
That is simple. In the colonies, we issue our own money. It is called colonial scrip. We issue it in proper proportion to the demands of trade and industry to make the products pass easily from the producers to the consumers. In this manner, creating for ourselves our own paper money, we control its purchasing power, and we have no interest to pay to no one.
Now, this was dangerous for King George III because King George III and the people that were surrounding him, they had a monopoly on gold and silver. They were the main issuer. People were buying all their gold and silver from them. Now, if people figured out that their country could actually do very well with just paper, then King George would lose his power. He would lose his hold on the other colonies, on the other countries. So what he did was he made Benjamin Franklin and the colonists pay their taxes in gold and silver. And the whole reason why they was using paper instead of gold and silver was because they didn't really have any gold and silver then. I mean, it was real scarce because the king was hoarding it all and it was making it real hard for people to get so he could drop the prices up. But this was dangerous because they basically figured out the secret to making your society run. The secret is basically that whatever the people agree is money, it's going to be money. It's going to be worth something. Now, since the colonies didn't have the gold and silver they needed to pay the taxes, it was very hard for them to pay their taxes. I mean, things got bad and, merchants had to change their methods of payment and people really couldn't afford the products. So what happened was they was like, you know what, we can't do this shit. So we're going to have to go to war. Now, this was the main cause for the Revolutionary War. As a matter of fact, Benjamin Franklin wrote in his autobiography that this was the reason for the Revolutionary War.
The colonies would gladly have borne a little tax on tea and other matters had it not been that England took away from the colonies their money, which created unemployment and dissatisfaction. The inability of the colonists to get the power to issue their own money permanently out of the hands of George III and the international bankers was the prime reason for the Revolutionary War.
And of course, after the war, America won its independence from King George III. But what this really did was really piss the British off. But not just the British, the people who were behind the British, the people who was behind the throne, the secret societies. Now, the main thing they wanted to do was get back control of America. And it was another reason why they wanted to do that, and I'll explain later. But this began the long struggle for Europe to install in America a private central bank. Now, this is what a central bank does.
A central bank is an institution that produces the currency of an entire nation. Based on historical precedent, two specific powers are inherent in central banking practice: the control of interest rates and the control of the money supply, or inflation. The central bank does not simply supply a government's economy with money, it loans it to them at interest. Then, through the use of increasing and decreasing the supply of money, the central bank regulates the value of the currency being issued. It is critical to understand that the entire structure of this system can only produce one thing in the long run: debt. It doesn't take a lot of ingenuity to figure this scam out. For every single dollar produced by the central bank is loaned at interest. That means every single dollar produced is actually the dollar plus a certain percent of debt based on that dollar. And since the central bank has the monopoly over the production of the currency for the entire country, and they loan each dollar out with immediate debt attached to it, where does the money to pay for the debt come from? It can only come from the central bank again, which means the central bank has to perpetually increase its money supply to temporarily cover the outstanding debt created, which in turn, since that new money is loaned out at interest as well, creates even more debt. The end result of this system without fail is slavery, for it is impossible for the government and thus the public to ever come out of the self-generating debt. The founding fathers of this country were well aware of this.
Now, what they don't teach you in school, what they don't talk about is just about every president we had before Woodrow Wilson had to deal with these international bankers trying to come in and set up a private central bank. Now, they succeeded a few times. We're gonna talk about that. But what most people don't understand is when Lincoln became president, a lot of people think that he wanted to free the slaves because slavery was wrong. But that wasn't the case. A lot of it had to do with private central banks. Now, this is the Lincoln quotes. This is what he said about slavery.
I have no purpose, directly or indirectly, to interfere with the institution of slavery in the states where it now exists. I believe I have no lawful right to do so, and I have no inclination to do so. My paramount objective is to save the Union, and it is not either to save or destroy slavery. If I could save the Union without freeing any slave, I would do it.
Now, the real reason why Lincoln wanted to free the slaves was because the South was bought and paid for with slaves. And slave labor basically made the South flourish, and it was doing well. And the North borrowed a lot of money to establish the colonies. And the bankers was putting a squeeze on Lincoln. So Lincoln wanted the South to pay more in taxes. And the South was like, no, we're not trying to do that. We're not trying to pay any more money. As a matter of fact, since y'all in trouble, we want to succeed from this union. We want to basically separate from the North. Now, Lincoln couldn't just go down there and say, hey, we're going to attack y'all because of money problems. We want y'all money. He had to come up with a reason to get the people and to get the Senate to accept the approval of a union, an army, to go down there and fight against the Confederates. Now, people was against slavery back then. They was really against slavery for a while at that time, believe it or not. Now, private central bank was already set up before this time, but we're gonna get into that. So Lincoln pushed Congress to approve the Civil War, and of course they did so, and the Civil War happened, not because of slavery, but because of money. Now, in 1781, Alexander Hamilton and Robert Morris got the Senate to approve the first privately owned central bank called the Bank of North America. Now, you already seen what private central banks do. It's not good for the people. So it caused the dollar to basically plummet. The value of the dollar went down. The value of the money went down. So these private central banks got charters, either 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, like that. So when a charter was up for the bank, the Senate didn't renew it because it wasn't good for the people. So it was cut off. Now, Alexander Hamilton and Robert Morris didn't give up there. They kept going after re-establishing a private central bank. Now, Robert Morris and Alexander Hamilton was being paid off by the international bankers. They wasn't Americans, international bankers. They were being bought. So about 6 years later, they reestablished a private central bank called the First Bank of the United States in Philadelphia. As a matter of fact, that building is still there today. It's still there. Now, Thomas Jefferson at this time was really against private central banks because, of course, he knew they was bad for the people. But most of the Senate and mostly everybody in the government at the time was being bought and paid for. They were being paid off by these international bankers. This is what Thomas Jefferson had to say about central banks.
If the American people ever allow private banks to control the issue of their currency, first by inflation, then by deflation, the banks and the corporations which grow up around them will deprive the people of all property until their children wake up homeless on the continent their fathers conquered.
Now, the people who was behind this whole international banking scam was the Rothschilds, the whole Rothschild banking dynasty, and the people like the Wahlbergs and all these people that was associated with the Rothschilds. Now, we all know that the Rothschilds today are the richest, powerfulest family on the planet, period. Because while these other bankers back then was loaning out money to regular people, the Rothschilds was loaning money to governments and kings. So they made a lot of money. As a matter of fact, Amschel Mayer Rothschild basically boasted. He basically is quoted as saying that, "Give me control of a nation's money supply, and I care not who make its laws." Now, at this time, James Madison was the president. And when the charter came up to be renewed for the First Bank of the United States, it didn't get renewed. Now, Rothschild threatened that if they did not renew the bank's charter, that America would find itself in another war. And when it came time for the charter to get renewed, of course it didn't, and England attacked America and the War of 1812 began. Now, England was already at war with Napoleon, so they really could not commit a lot of troops to the battle with us. So the War of 1812 ended in a draw 2 years later. Now, the Rothschilds was a powerful family. It only took them 2 years to reestablish another private central bank. Now, in 1816, the Second Bank of the United States was established. Now, let me explain to you how this whole thing works. Now, let's say it costs $10 million to establish a private central bank. The American government had to put up 20% up front, so that's $2 million. Now, what they did was take that $2 million and loan it to other bankers, and they would use that money as collateral to get more money, and then use that money to make up the other 80% to buy up the rest of the bank. So you basically had a bunch of international bankers who own 80% of an American bank, while the citizens itself only own 20%. Now, this is basically a big scam because they really paid no money at all for the other 80%. They used the American government's money to establish the other 80%. It's a huge scam. Now, the Second Bank of the United States lasted about 12 years until Andrew Jackson became president. Now, Andrew Jackson really hated private central banks. He ran his whole campaign on killing the bank because he felt like, hey, why the hell should we be borrowing money when we could just print our own money? I mean, it worked before. So when he became president, he fired 2,000 people who worked for the government because they were being bought by the international bankers. Now, the bankers bought some more people after that, and they got the Senate to pass a bill to approve the recharter of the private central bank for another 20 years. Now, when the bill got on Andrew Jackson's desk, of course, he vetoed the bill. And this is what he had to say about that.
It is not our own citizens only who are to receive the bounty of our government. More than 8 millions of the stock of this bank are held by foreigners. Is there no danger to our liberty and independence in a bank that in its nature has so little to bind it to our country? Controlling our currency, receiving our public monies, and holding thousands of our citizens' independence would be more formidable and dangerous than a military power of the enemy. If government would confine itself to equal protection and, as heaven does its rains, shower its favor alike on the high and the low, the rich and the poor, it would be an unqualified blessing. In the act before me, there seems to be a wide and unnecessary departure from these just principles.
Now, when the bank's charter was up, Andrew Jackson ordered his Treasury Secretary to remove the bank's deposit from its reserves. Now, he refused to do it, and he was fired, and William J. Dwayne was appointed to do the job. And he refused to do it, so he was fired, and Robert B. Taney was ordered to do it, and he did just that. Now, the Treasury Secretary from the private central bank, who was Nicholas Biddle at the time, he threatened that if they remove the bank's deposits, if they don't recharter the bank for another 20 years, that he would cause a depression. He would cause money to become scarce. Now, let me explain to you how this works. Basically, a private central bank loans money to smaller banks. Now, these smaller banks then loan that money to businesses and people. Now, if you retract the money supply, if you cause money to become scarce, then those small businesses won't be able to stay afloat. Now, those banks who loan out that money, they're going to have to do what's basically called a margin call. They're going to either have to call in the loans that they made out to those businesses or people, or raise the interest rates of those people, basically almost doubling it, because they need that money to basically stay open, because the only way they make money is to loan out money. Now, if they retract the money supply, then people who have these small businesses are not going to be able to stay open, and people who have like mortgage loans for their houses not going to be able to afford them. So this is going to cause a depression because people are going to get fired because these companies can't stay open any longer. People are going to lose their house because they can't afford the mortgage payment. So he did just that. But still, in 1834, the bank's charter was not renewed, and Andrew Jackson defeated the private central bank. He was the only president to ever defeat the private central bank and cause them to basically be gone for over 10 years. As a matter of fact, it took him 77 years to come back. Andrew Jackson was the only president to actually balance the American budget and get America out of debt and making money. Now, when Lincoln became president in 1860, the private central banks knew that America was doing okay. They really wasn't in too much debt. Now they needed a way to create debt, and the best way to create debt and cause a need for a private central bank is war. So they basically instigated the whole civil war between the North and the South, so that America or the North would basically need money to fight the war against the South. But what Lincoln did, he was smart. He created the greenbacks, and the greenbacks was just like regular money, and it could be redeemed just like regular money, and he used those greenbacks to pay for the war. Now, everybody think Lincoln was assassinated because he freed the slaves. That was one of the reasons. But the main reason why they killed Lincoln was because he figured out the secret, and that was print your own money to pay for everything. And he printed money to pay for the war, which was the biggest no-no to the international bankers and the secret societies, because they caused so many wars throughout Europe and financed both sides of the war and made so much profits. And the whole thing was, whatever side won the war had to agree to pay the other side's debt. Now, they was going to use this whole method against us to pay for the Civil War, but Lincoln was smart and he created greenbacks to do just that, and that was the reason why they killed him. Now, since the private central bank did not get reestablished, the bankers came up with a master plan, and that plan is still in place today. Now, Woodrow Wilson was approached by these bankers and promised the presidency if he did one thing, and that was sign into law the Federal Reserve Act. So in 1913, President Woodrow Wilson signed into law the Federal Reserve Act, and that was the end of America as we know it. That was the downfall of the American economy. And finally, once and for all, in the hands of the international bankers was the American money system. Now I'll let Ron Paul's brother, explain to you what happened.
1913, the Federal Reserve Act was passed. Floor of the House, where 3 members of Congress were on the floor. At that time, they only needed a majority of votes to pass it. So in 1913, the Federal Reserve Act was passed. 20 years later, 1933, under Roosevelt, the United States was declared bankrupt. And in 1933, the Federal Reserve Private Bank says, okay, USA, what are you going to pledge as collateral on the debt you owe me? What happened by 1936? Does anybody know? We instituted Social Security system, and you and I and our children and our children's children were pledged as collateral on the debt of our government to the Federal Reserve. And that's where we're at today. It took 20 years to make this country bankrupt, and since then, our government has operated under emergency powers of our government. It is not the president that makes the decision in this country. It's the Secretary of Treasury who turns around and is put in there by the Federal Reserve to manage the bankruptcy. We've been in bankruptcy ever since. So to print $700 billion and to give it away, how do they get away with it? The manager of the bankruptcy is told by the Federal Reserve this is the way to go. That's where we're at today.
Okay, something you need to understand. First, America is bankrupt. All the money you got in your pocket represents debt, not wealth. Second, paying federal taxes is unconstitutional. You are not supposed to pay federal taxes. which is why when you go get a job, they make you fill out a W-4 form. The W-4 form is basically says that you waive your rights to not pay taxes and you agree to pay federal taxes by signing that form. And no job will hire you if you don't fill out that W-4, because they won't get tax breaks and they won't get government grants if you don't fill it out. Now, for y'all people who don't really pay attention to politics, for y'all people who watch the news and believe everything that you see on the news and don't realize that the news is bought and paid for and owned by the people, the very international bankers who's running this whole scam. For y'all people who believe that Obama is here to help people, who Obama is here to save black people, come on. You need to pay attention to politics and watch what's going on. Obama is a tool of the international bankers, just like all those other sellout was. If they had it before, if they was doing this before, what makes you think they're not doing it now? They started this a long time ago, and they finally got their hands on the American economy, on the American money system. What makes you think they just gonna all of a sudden make things right?
Barack is like the manager of Burger King. All presidents are, including Bush. It's like this: when your fries are cold, if your burger is not done right, you go back to Burger King, America, or your government, and you say, my burger's cold, I want new fries. First, you go to the cashier, that's the courts. You argue to the courts. The courts, if you can't get no justice with the cashier, you say, let me see the manager. I want to go to the Supreme Court. I want to see the president. The manager comes out. Hi, what can I do for you? Now the manager can override the decisions of the cashier, but you never get to see the franchise owner of Burger King. If you really have a problem with your burger, you need to go see the franchise owner. We need to go to the top or to the bottom. We need to go to where the real architecture of government is. And it's not in a president, it's in a global scheme.
Politics in America today is identical to pro wrestling. And what I mean by that is, in front of the cameras and the public, we all hate each other. I'm going to kick my opponent's butt. I'm going to whale him from here to high water and beat the crap out of him. Yet behind the scenes, we all are friends going out to dinner.
Went to dinner together.
And it's all a work.
All intermarried. Show business.
It's showbiz. And that's what you have today in politics. The Democrats and Republicans aren't really opposed to each other.
Left and right mean nothing. The only thing that counts is, are you working for Wall Street or you're trying to defend the people against the financiers? A lot of people think that the Federal Reserve is already part of the government. They're not. It's controlled by cliques of unelected, unaccountable bankers meeting in secret. Most of these people have never even been through the formality of a Senate hearing or a Senate confirmation. They claim that they're part of the U.S. government. They masquerade as if they were part of the U.S. government. But in reality, this is a purely private operation. Jackals, hyenas, raptors, all of them loyal, not to the American people, but to the Wall Street banks, which is where most of them come from.
Everyone is pointing to Barack right now, President Obama, as saying, you got to get the economy together. You got to get the economy together. When in fact, the president has very little to do with the economy. It's the Federal Reserve chairman that at least sets the policy. That's a privately owned company, the Federal Reserve Bank. They set the agenda.
What is the proper relationship? What should be the proper relationship between a chairman of the Fed and a president of the United States?
Well, first of all, the Federal Reserve is an independent agency, and that means basically that there is no other agency of government which can overrule actions that we take. So long as that is in place and there is no evidence that the administration or the Congress or anybody else is requesting that we do things other than what we think is the appropriate thing, then what the relationships are don't frankly matter.
Notice what Greenspan is saying. Greenspan is saying the Federal Reserve is beyond the law. And in reality, they are in practice beyond the law. Nobody, as far as I know, has ever audited the Federal Reserve. One of the first things we ought to do when we nationalize the Fed is go in there and find out the audit. Who stole money? Who engaged in corruption? There's a whole series of people going back to Volcker, to Greenspan, to Bernanke, and so forth.
Now, since the international bankers finally got in, they finally got control of the American money system, they bankrupt America. And you gotta understand, this whole thing started with Lincoln.
So if they had telephones then, the phone would ring from Abraham Lincoln to Jefferson Davis in the South and say, President Davis, this is President Lincoln, and we need what you have. And President Davis says, ain't our problem, it's your problem. Well, it's your problem now because we're gonna come and get you. And we're going to take everything you have, and we're going to call it the Civil War and say it's over slavery. Well, it's a well-known fact the governor of Maine had 65 slaves. So
it wasn't over slavery.
It wasn't slavery. I mean, that's a nice history thing, but that's just another rewrite of history.
But it was a commerce issue.
It was commerce. It's always about money. In that context, Lincoln then suspended the Constitution of the United States in 1861. And the Civil War was declared. Now, with that suspension comes in what we now know as executive orders. If you trace back executive orders, the first one was written in 1861. The only way they can write an executive order then and now is if the Constitution of the United States is suspended. So, therefore, we come back modern day. If you mention your constitutional rights one more time in my courtroom, I'm going to put you in jail for contempt. Because there is no such thing. Okay? So, now we need a new pledge. Lincoln, to his credit, figured it out, I believe, before the end of his term. And that's why he was killed. First thing he did was print greenbacks. And he was going to repudiate the debt and issue currency of the United States with no interest. Okay, that was his reorganization. Yeah. That was his reorganization plan. Okay, a bullet got in the way of that. Interestingly, 100 years later, another president tried the same thing, and he got killed too. His name was Kennedy. That's how all that ties together. Kennedy printed U.S. notes, and he was going to issue those. Lyndon Johnson's first executive order was to rescind that order that Kennedy had written to issue U.S. notes. Now, if you go then to 1860 and 61, we got to make a new pledge. We pledge all the assets of the South. And in that comes the ratification of the 14th Amendment. In 1871, there's a government called, a corporation called the Government of the District of Columbia. February 19th, 1871. In 1878, the name of that corporation is changed to the United States. Now the 14th Amendment is here. The government of the United States, a corporation is in place, and all the districts. You all live in the District of Washington, Western Division. Did you know that?
Yeah, it's amazing. I did know that, but that kind of terminology is totally foreign to us.
Yes. We don't think anything of it, but you have to look at Washington, District of Columbia. Okay? What is Columbia? What is that? Anyway, to get back to our bankruptcy story.
Yeah, that is a good question. What is that?
They pledge all the assets of the South. All the gold, all the agriculture, everything. The South was paid for. They had everything. The North was bankrupt because that was where all the industry was. There was nobody, it was cold, there's no money, the bankers are squeezing them. So you go into bankruptcy again, you pledge all the assets of the South, and now you jump forward to September 17th, 1929. 45 days before October 29th, 1929. When everybody knows what happens then, the stock market crashes. Roosevelt gets elected in 1932, and the first thing he does for the first approximately 100 days is rewrite everything in this country. He stacks the Supreme Court to back every decision he makes as constitutional, but there's a problem. There's got to be another pledge made because we're still in reorganization. Now, if they've pledged the South, and in 1929 they recaptured all the land because all the farmers went bankrupt, and the banks held all the paper, what is there left to pledge? The only thing left is the people, is the people, is the people.